Well, thank you very much. And everyone, welcome to the Environmental Justice and Community Engagement Workshop this afternoon. I just don't have the words to express how excited we are to have Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, Brenda and Omega, and their son Io as presenters um, for this afternoon's conference. We were committed to finding community experts who could, speak to community engagement. If you turn to pages 17 and 18, you will see their extensive bios. And I'm not going to read them entirely, but just give highlights to indicate the expertise, community-based, that is in the room. In 1994, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, excuse me, brought low-income and minority residents together in maybe North Carolina to establish the West End Revitalization Association. WERA was formed in response to a long history of being denied access to city water and sewer and a planned road that would destroy neighborhoods without mitigation. To address residents' civil rights and environmental justice concerns, WERA created an innovative research paradigm called community-owned and managed research. WERA combines COMAR with collaborative problem solving to empower low-income minority communities to produce scientific data and translate research into action. Their son Io is an environmental justice soldier with his parents, and currently is director of clean energy and climate justice at West End Revitalization Association. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and Io, you are on. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Do we have our slides up? Thank you so much. We're very glad to be here. Our connection is with Dr. Saunders from the National Citizen Science Association's International Conference that was in Raleigh in March of 2019. My wife and I were part of the organizers to integrate and diversify with over 50 states present, and all 50 states present, including the Caribbean islands, and also Puerto Rico, as well as 28 countries who came together. Our presentation has a double name, of course. We're identifying the community-owned and managed research model, as well as clean energy and climate justice. And the subtitle is the community-owned and managed and clean energy and climate justice are Weaver's drops scientifically to help change the environmental justice ground truthing formula, right? Next slide. I'm Omega Wilson, and I'm going to present and talk about the use of the COMA model for ground truthing and implementation of civil rights policy and public health statutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Wilson. I'm going to be presenting EJ for public school, who is addressing environmental safety for children and teachers.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Io Wilson. I'll be presenting on transition to the White House policy mandates on clean energy and climate justice and how that relates to what we're doing in Lebanon and Alamance County.
Next slide. Dr. Sanders referenced some of this in our introduction. And basically, our work is a fight for civil rights, for public health amenities and infrastructure. Of course, you know, MEBN was founded as a nonprofit in 1995 by four African-American couples. And my wife and I are the only ones that are still living who started the process at the time. The main focus had to do with getting infrastructure, which is referred to by the United States Department of Justice as denial of basic amenities, public health amenities, safe drinking water, sewer, housing, streets, sidewalks, stormwater management for people of color. In our community, originally, of course, there were Native American indigenous areas and people who were freed from slavery. And now there's a growing population of Latinx community. The highway that was going to destroy most of the original homes and cemeteries was 27 miles, or is 27 miles from where we live in Mebane off of Interstate 85. Some of you have been here, all the way to Danville, Virginia. So it's the interstate highway corridor. The federal administrative complaints that we filed dealt with this to mitigate the total destruction of houses, churches, cemeteries, and we referenced it under the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, et cetera, and more, based on violations of those. Next slide. The Environmental Protection Agency is responsible for establishing environmental impact statements. Some of you may know what that is. Before they do a major project with federal monies or state monies, they're required to study and see what the impact is going to be. This is federal, and very often they solicit the support of university people, very much like the ones that have been presenting from the beginning of the program to now, right? But what we found out is that data and that information basically diminished our existence and identified areas that was basically vacant of houses and churches where Black and brown people have been living and churches have been for over 100 years. So this whole question of denial of services goes back to denial that we exist in the data files. And this is, of course, intentional to make it easier. Our complaint we filed actually was to address these disparities. This is a church, my family church, that was built in 1893 by freed slaves. And it was one of the churches that was destroyed in order to build a highway. It's no longer there. I just happened to make sure I was on site while they were destroying it. And within about 30 minutes of my taking this picture, it was just a pile of rubble. The University of North Carolina Chapel Hill was working with us at our request and a request by the Environmental Protection Agency to do testing to identify that there were other disparities other than the highway impact, that there was E. coli and fecal coliform in drinking wells, in streams, and we also found it in city water that had not been reported by the city or by EPA. Next slide. Now, this is a picture of some of the documentation relative to the impact to indigenous communities. The lady taking the picture is Dr. Valerie Johnson, originally from California, been in North Carolina for decades. I used to teach at University of North Carolina Chapel Hill. She also taught at Bennett, the HBCU for Women Historic University in Greensboro, North Carolina. And now she's a Dean of Arts and Sciences and Humanities at Shaw University, where my wife and I graduated from in the mid-70s, and we're still very close contact with her. That's the one of the churches that was targeted for elimination, the Presbyterian Church that was constructed at Cornerstone in 1865. It was the church that was built literally out of the white slave masters' churches. The Scott family, Scott plantation, dairy farmers, the mixed race African Americans. This was the church that the plantation owners allowed to be built, not this original structure, but this is the site for a small frame church that was built. Was built in 1865. The African-American residents who founded the church came directly out of the plantation church, and they were actually blood related to the Scots. And the gentleman who was the first pastor here was a Scot. And the Scott family produced two governors, W. Kerr Scott, Robert Scott, and Ralph Scott as senator. One of those governors, Robert Scott, we knew very personally, and he was one of the ones that facilitated some of our first meetings all the way back in 1997, right? Okay, next slide. We identified these areas, there are 9, the communities should address. And very often the research process, they put themselves in the middle of everything. Universities put themselves in the middle of everything to collect data. But the community should be in the middle of everything, because all of these bubbles that we identify here actually has to service them in order to keep communities alive. But these areas underserve Black and Brown, Latino, Native American communities. Of course, you see ourselves in the middle. This was a model when we start doing our work ourselves. We changed the whole university paradigm. One of the bubbles on the outside is our relationship with other communities. Because in most cities like Wilmington and other places, there are other communities in and around a city or in the county. We included them, right, as a part of the process because we already related to them. Then the healthcare, we're going clockwise. Then the healthcare community, whether or not it is doing what it should do to address health disparities. Then the legal part are people being legally protected by the city, county, state, federal government, et cetera. Then the whole research part, how do you collect data that is fair and equitable to make sure people are included and they're speaking for themselves like we're doing today. And we were very dismayed, my wife and I, that we didn't see that. We didn't see that inclusion from the beginning of the program down to now. It should have been included. The people you're talking about, the communities we're talking about, should have been in this program to co-present all the way down from the governor's office to where we are speaking now. The other one is that collaborative partnership should include ways to revitalize the community with federal monies. Now we have all the stimulus money coming from Congress, and some of it is still not getting to us. And then, of course, there are the non-government organizations. Some of them are local, some of them are national, some of them are international, like the Sierra Club, like the Center for Biological Diversity, like the Environmental Defense Fund. All of those we've done work and filed complaints with, also are involved. Then we want to, all of that is supposed to make the local government agencies, or the local, state, or federal, do their job. Next slide. There are 4 basic principles that we included because we found the community-based participatory research model was too weak, right? And that's basically what we've been hearing from just about every presenter today, especially for the panel prior to our lunch break. It did not include funding equity. That's a major principle. There should be funding equity. It was spoken to by a couple of the people on the panel before lunch. Management parity is the same. It should be managed all the way through the process. That was mentioned earlier this morning too. And science for compliance, we didn't hear that. That when you identify the disparity based on federal policy, civil rights laws, public health statutes, then there should be an operating principle that once you find that there's a non-compliant or disparity, that the science should be focused on not just collecting data for publications and academic degrees and students' PhDs and dissertations, but to correct a problem. That's a major failure that we're still seeing, and it was apparent in our presentations this morning. We want that data to be specifically used to leverage results at the ground level. for measurable outcomes, whether that's street improvement, water management, actually installing safe drinking water and sewer facilities, whatever it might be. And this basic principle, we have not found in the many years that I've been doing our work and talking to people all across the country, has not included this part. EPA has presented the community-based participatory research model, and universities have presented it, and we are still pushing that the COMA model is more interactive and more designed on correcting problems rather than collecting data. Next slide. Going all the way back to when slavery time ended, there was evidence of human waste in drinking water and surface water. That's not new information, but it had not been addressed and had still not being clearly addressed. In 1994, 95, of course, we were organized. In 1994 to 97, we start structuring what we're doing, taking photographs, doing interviews, doing surveys. This is long before we had any connection with any university. And of course, there were several communities in and around Mebane in two counties, Alamance County and Orange County. Orange County, Mebane, Orange County, North Carolina. There are there are more orange counties, of course, in California and Florida. And these communities are identified by name. Everybody here knows what the names are. West End is where we're sitting. White Level has a significant indigenous population. It still remains. East End is currently in the city limits. And we also have Buckhorn and Cheeks Cross, Perry Hill, which are in the Orange County side. Mebane branches over in two counties. From 1997 to the present, we were receiving general operating funds from the Zephyrus Reynolds Foundation, which is one of the largest foundations from tobacco wealth in the South, and we still receive funds from them. Right. In 2000, the United States Environmental Protection Office, we got a grant from them of $15,000 to start doing water samples to have it tested at the University of North Carolina's virology lab of things that people already knew. The common knowledge was we have waste in water and streams and ditches in front of people's houses and been there 30 years and nothing's been done about it. So of course you had to validate and actually verify that what people in the community are saying is quote unquote true. So we did it in 2000. We did it again with a federal grant of $100,000. It took samples for the same thing all over again. This replication. Somebody asked a question about why does it take so long? A lot of times because government agencies and universities want to replicate to either get more money or write more papers for the same issue we already know about, but we did it. And from 2000 to 2007, drinking water samples were tested at the virology lab, and we found all of these disparities. And the control test, by the way, was to use a city's drinking water to show the residents that if they get on the city, they will be in a much safer situation. A lot of this information is found on our old website. You see it there, wera-nc.org. Excuse me, our new website, you take the dash out, wera-nc.org. It's our updated website. Next slide. In 2000, we were rejected. The University of North Carolina Chapel Hill's community-based participatory research model as insufficient. And we talked to professors and students about that. Some of those students who were working with us. And we addressed the failure to address, since they were talking about Black and Brown communities and they knew they were doing that, not addressing civil rights violations in the research model. We filed a complaint to the United States Department of Justice in 1999, and they quoted to us that you're dealing with denial of basic amenities due to a historic pattern of racial discrimination. That's directly from one of the highest deputy justices at the time. So that was the reason we were in the condition we were in, and that the community-based participatory research model had no legal teeth to fight institutional racism. University-led research in communities meant academic papers without solutions. Exploitation, colonial approach. Next slide. We had some.
Are you in yet? Yeah. Oh, okay. Because I didn't see your name in participants. Okay.
Sorry, please, as you come in, mute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, can I continue?
Yes.
Okay. We got some results from this and from the work we did in our filing complaints in the United States Department of Justice. 1999 to 2016, there was a moratorium placed on the multi-million-dollar highway corridor from where we live to Virginia, from Danville, Virginia. 2000 civil rights mitigation references that reference Environmental Justice Executive Order 12898. That's the name of the order. Block grants for safe drinking water and sewer and first-time sewer installation was done for 100 plus houses. I think about 104 to be exact. Removed outhouses that were still in the city, in the Black community, in the city. The first time paving of residential streets in Black communities in the city and in the county that were passed by ever since they've been paving roads in North Carolina 100 some years ago. Resurfaced main through streets through West End, which is a street that we live on. It was like a wagon trail, more potholes than you can count, and they neglected to maintain it, the state, the city, or the county. Stop low-income housing development on top of a 100-year-old 9-acre landfill. The city had approved the process of building a subdivision for Black and brown people on top of a landfill. Illegal, but they were going to do it anyhow. We stopped that process. The modification of the highway corridor to save dozens of houses, 70 some, 2 churches, and the community cemetery that you saw earlier was actually, they had to modify the plan because we kept filing complaints. So it held the whole process up from 1999 to 2016 because of all the violations we continue to find. Even though they said everything is good to go, we said, no, it's not. We filed another complaint and another complaint and another complaint. Next slide. This is part of the construction process that's already taking place. When they got ready to build the highway, we found in 1994 that the federal government and the EPA, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, it failed to address a Superfund site that was in the path. It was a 30-acre old furniture plant, a facility, and it had all kinds of chemical hazards in it. It had never been cleaned up, and they left the chemicals unsecured. We filed a complaint to get them to clean it up and change the path so it wouldn't go right through the site. When we filed a complaint, they had to clean up over 5,000 pounds of chemical waste that a gallon of it would pollute a lake. This is chemicals used to process and stain furniture. Cancer-causing benzene, xylene was detected up to 45 feet below ground level down to the water table. And the state, the county, the city, and NIH had done nothing. We had to file a complaint to change the path of the corridor. The slide on the left shows you the entranceway to that facility. And the slide on the right shows you part of the mitigation that changed it. Thank you. Next slide. This is the highway corridor that reaches over that same site. You can see it being built. To the left under the bridge, you can see the old plant and the water tower you saw earlier. So the changing of the path actually moved it around. This is a 1 mile overpass. The DOT told us is one of the longest dry land overpasses in the state of North Carolina. Most of the time, the overpasses that are this long are in inland waterway areas, right? And the environmental impact statement disregarded this major issue. we had to bring it up again and again and again. Next slide. Some of the information we produced was shared, and the COMA principles was shared at EPA. I was asked to be a representative for our organization in 2007 to address these issues in several working groups. One specifically had to do with goods movement, highway corridors, marine corridors, etc. And a lot of the university people who were a part of the goods movement committee, working group, refused to accept our information as a community perspective members, because the dynamic and the demographics of the work group was very much like the demographics of this workshop. Almost all university people, highly paid, and just a few community people. There were Native Americans there, but all of them dropped out except for me, the last community person representative. And I had to file a complaint against EPA with the former administrator, Lisa Perez Jackson, originally from New Orleans, to get the people who were on the work group to accept a community voice. And the whole project was referred to as reducing air emissions associated with goods movement, working toward environmental justice. It was officially approved in July 2010. And the section that I wrote for this long document is section 3.1 and 3.1A, effective community engagement and community facilitated strategy, which basically is an outline of what we're talking about right here today. Next slide. We have several national recognitions for the work we're doing. And 2007 to 2010, of course, I mentioned being a community perspective member for EPA, and we travel all over the country doing this. I travel all over the country doing this with other community groups and university representatives, government representatives for 4 years. 2008, we received the Environmental Justice Achievement Award for our work and our contribution. 2008 to 2010, we received a $100,000 grant to vet our model by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and to demonstrate that they were serious about parity and funding equity. It was a 50-50 split. $50,000 went to the University of South Carolina with one of our former students who had become an associate professor after he finished his postdoc work at the University of Michigan. His name is Dr. Brenda Wilson. Now he's an associate professor at University of Maryland, right? So we had to vet our model, and half the money went to our organization, half the money went to him. That's equity. We included some of this information in various documents at various times, and some of it was included in the Environmental Justice Forum, December 2008, at the beginning of the Biden administration. The Biden administration, we were invited to be a part of that, present some information. It was on the White House website for years. 2015, we presented the model with NIEHS. They asked us, could they post it on the website to recognize our work as one of the top 4 or 5 out of 200 and some community groups that they work with. And we were listed, and it's still on the website. If you Google our organization's name, or WERA, NIEHS, so Omega Wilson or COMA, it will come up, and a lot of other things will come up too, because we've done other things with them more recently. 2021, the American Public Health Association awarded my wife and myself the first couple who ever received the Damu Smith Award for environmental justice and public health advocacy for people of color, right? In 2022, WERA's community-owned and managed model includes a specific tool called Memorandum of Understanding and Memorandum of Agreement that you sign with community organizations to make sure they're treated fairly. It was officially approved unanimously by its board of directors, which has an international footprint in the United States, in Europe, and in Australia. So that is used as an official footprint, so we can encourage other organizations like the people listening here and beyond to start adopting it too. We're also working directly with the American Public Health Association to do the same. Next slide.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Wilson. I'm also co-founder of WERA, Western Revitalization Association, founded here in Mebane, North Carolina. And I'm also a special education teacher, and I've been teaching for about 35 years. I taught in Mississippi and North Carolina. The two pictures that you see there are Mclaren Elementary School, located in Brandon, Mississippi, and New Hope Elementary School, located in Orange County, North Carolina. The Mclaren Elementary School in Brandon didn't look like that when I was teaching. So that's over maybe close to 20, 25 years ago. And so they reconstructed the building. But when I was working there, we were concerned about the mold and the mildew, the air production or the air quality in the school. And we complained about that quite a bit. In New Hope, in Orange County here in North Carolina, after the school was built, that's a picture of it when it was brand new. We had some difficulties maybe a year or 2 years later concerning about the mold, mildew, the air quality, and sometimes the water fountains weren't working correctly. And because of the mildew and the air quality, different problems with the air quality, the school is built on farmland. So all that moisture and coming from the ground up through the school, we had a problem with that. Next slide, please. I'm concerned about environmental justice science for compliance and enforcement as far as concerned with teachers and students. Again, I'm quoting that I taught 35 years as a special education teacher. Our son Kojo was a special needs teacher, and now he's a media technology assistant. And his wife Tia is an elementary school teacher and a human resource official. My husband, Omega Wilson, also taught at the college and community college levels in impaired school buildings in Mississippi and in North Carolina. And my son Kojo also taught in some schools that were not as well built as they should have been, and as well as my daughter-in-law, Tia. Too many students live in environmental justice communities and also attend schools that should be declared environmental justice schools. Chronic contamination and pollution rob students of health, IQ, college scholarships, athletic achievements, and future leadership. When will the National Institute of Environmental Health Science help address this legacy of crisis at ground level in our public schools? We have a lot of public schools throughout the nation that are in well-developed communities. But then we also have schools that are in environmental justice communities, and those communities are made up of basically Black and brown people. You may have a few whites that are there, and those schools need to be taken care of and even torn down and rebuilt. But for some reason, the school systems have not addressed that problem, and the kids suffer. Next slide. The Green New Deal for Public Education Act, Senator Bernie Sanders, and he's an independent from Vermont. WERA has shared Green New Deal ideas with Senator Sanders' office on matters such as environmental justice, safe drinking water, sewer service access, and infrastructure amenities often denied of people of color communities. In June 2021, Senator Sanders' office requested WERA support for the proposed Green New Deal for Public Education Act. Proposed funding would be $1.36 trillion, a total over 10 years, along with technical assistance and other resources for public schools districts to advance environmental, health, economic, and educational equality. Over 400,000 public schools in urban small cities, rural and indigenous areas are reported to be at risk for environmental justice. For over 2 years, COVID-19 has added a layer of disappropriate illness and death for people of color. Can we get NIEHS to help address COVID-19 environmental justice as a new health disparity? Next slide. Children are our future. And they keep saying that here in the United States, but sometimes I don't quite believe they are really believing that themselves and just say that to be saying it, especially of politicians right now. Reduce environment pollution in communities and in schools. In 2019, teachers and parents marched on the North Carolina General Assembly demanding long overdue pay increase and upgrade of school facilities, technology, air conditioning, and removal of lead of old schools, water infrastructure. Some schools have issues with black mold, as I mentioned earlier, mildew, leaks that damage ceilings. Coastal area schools are often damaged by hurricanes, and some have not been repaired or replaced. These educational disparities impede student achievements, test scores necessary for them to enter college and earn scholarships. Medical science has informed us that the lead in drinking water, including old hallway water fountains, result in a lifetime of lower IQ, health burden, pain, and suffering. All the educators in our family have experienced stuffy classrooms without windows, poor sunlight, poor ventilation, mold and mildew, been exposed to water fountains that should not be operating and should be closed down or replaced. This environmental injustice is in education. Let's support Senator Sanders' Green New Deal for public education. Next slide.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aya Wilson. Okay, we're gonna. Can everybody hear me? Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Recently, last year, the West End Revitalization Association established a Clean Energy and Climate Justice Initiative with collaborative funding from the Environmental Defense Fund, Women's Fund, and Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. This initiative supports numerous federal government, agency, and local, state, and national grassroots efforts. Mebane area's mega industrial and distribution centers and 119 bypass interstate highway construction corridor present specific challenges that can be addressed to implement a clean energy and climate justice mitigations for local, state, and national environmental safeguards. Construction on the 119 bypass interstate project began a few years ago after a 16-year moratorium resulting from a 1999 Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 administrative complaint that referenced Environmental Justice Executive Order 12898 filed by Wheeler at the U.S. Department of Justice. That administrative complaint brought attention to the NCDOT plan targeting destruction of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities in Mebane that were denied access to basic public health amenities, infrastructure, including safe drinking water, sewer connection, paved streets, and stormwater management. Thousands of acres of farmland and forests are being cleared and have been cleared for the construction of the 27-mile 4-lane highway corridor from I-8540 in Mebane to Danville, Virginia. Walmart, Lidl, UPS, Chick-fil-A, and many more mega industrial distribution centers are being constructed overburdened the environment and existing public health infrastructure of the area without substantial implementation of measures to engage in green and equitable energy practices to reduce their carbon footprint. These major construction sites are recognized as among the largest on the East Coast and in the nation. Recently, The $1.2 trillion federal infrastructure bill was passed. And North Carolina Senators Tom Tillis and Richard Burr voted for it. Tom Tillis is quoted as saying, "As a member of the bipartisan infrastructure group in the Senate, I worked hard to ensure this package improves North Carolina's roads, highways, and bridges, as well as major funding for clean water. I am proud we could get this important legislation signed into law." We and our collaborative partners are requesting that local, regional, and state government planning and zoning authorities formally include the following in the policies for permitting and zoning major construction projects for accessing and using funding from HR 3684 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of the 117th Congress. Next slide, please. Electric charging stations and for electric vehicles and solar energy cells should be included in the infrastructure of these massive distribution and industrial centers, where measurable car traffic for employees and visitors, as well as the amount of cargo trucks traveling to and from these facilities. Schools, colleges, and universities see a lot of car traffic, and they all have designated parking for visitors, staff, freshmen, upperclassmen, and so forth. My undergraduate days at Appalachian State, Go Mountaineers, reminds me of the capacity the colleges and universities have to install these. Grocery stores and malls are sites of massive carbon footprints of operations and traffic. Equitable siting of these facilities would support racial and economic justice on a path towards sustainable, less contaminated communities, especially those of color. Next slide, please. New energy initiatives must be bundled with old first-time infrastructure for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and low-wealth communities that have been historically denied basic amenities and assaulted with infrastructure projects in Mebane, Durham, Columbus, Ohio, and beyond, as I've lived in those places, and I've seen the impact it has on communities of color. They must include first-time safe drinking water and sewer services, residential street paving and repair, broadband access and internet services for residential areas and schools. The COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the fact that this is an environmental justice issue, and as well as stormwater management. Next slide, please. We started mapping our environmental justice lives 21 years ago in the year 2000. We identified safe drinking water and sewer infrastructure disparities based on systems of racism and white supremacy in the Buckhorn, Perry Hill, East End, West End, and white level communities. In 2021, last year, we in the city of Mebane began working together using WERA's old maps to produce EPA EJ screening maps of people of color communities, as well as a community health assessment mapping with officials with the Alamance County Health Equity Collective. And that community health assessment was recently released, along with our environmental justice reports within that. How do we collectively utilize this information to identify and remove physical and social health disparities using science for justice, humanity, and equity? In the picture here, we can see a bridge that connects to the sewage treatment plant that the city of Mebane uses, which is right behind West End community. For a long time, that access was blocked off. There was a street there, but it was blocked off by a chain link fence that the city kept locked at all times. And right there on that area, beside the sewage treatment plant, was the Mebane Arts and Community Center, which was built, and I had to be a teenager maybe at that time. Next to that was the elementary school that I went to. The community on that side was a large white community, and they could walk to that space and access it really easily. The Black community couldn't. They were actually blocked from it structurally. They could look at it and see that they were blocked from it. Those things are changing. You see the access road here that's paved in that area, but the bridge still needs to be worked on. There's some other things that are happening. Next slide, please. We can see here in Mebane, last year, the city approved a $900,000 greenway, the second connector between West End community, Black West End community, and white subdivisions physically separated since slavery ended in 1865. A 2-mile drive to South Mebane Elementary School, the school I alluded to in this previous slide, will now be a 3-block walk for Black children to school at the Mebane Arts and Community Center with their white schoolmates. This is the first greenway for Mebane, one of the fastest growing cities in North Carolina. So this we can see is concrete infrastructure, for lack of a better term, concrete, but infrastructure that we can see that knocks down the barriers between white communities and Black communities on the path towards equity and justice within the city of Mebane. Next slide, please. In regards to our CJ climate equity and justice work and initiative, I alluded to in the previous slide a collaboration with WERA in the city of Mebane with our environmental justice mapper with Indigenous, Black, and Latinx communities in Alamance, Orange County, which started last year. Also, the Alamance County Health Department requests WERA to draft the environmental justice section for its county health assessment. That's required by state law. Those health assessments are required by state law every 5 years. That health assessment was recently released. Earlier this year, Orange County commissioners endorsed our initiative, saying, quote, "On behalf of the Orange County Board of Commissioners, I am writing to convey the board's support of the Clean Energy and Climate Justice Initiative being led by the Western Revitalization Association by Renee Price, Board Chair Renee Price, who's running for higher office in the state of North Carolina right now." Last month, we also heard from State Senator Natalie Murdoch, who represents the 20th district, which covers the county of Durham, where I'm sitting right now. She said, quote, "As a senator for Durham County, it is my pleasure to support the Clean Energy and Climate Environmental Justice Initiative that is led by West End Revitalization Association. This initiative is of vital importance in the fight towards improving the environment, as well as encouraging social justice reform." That was last month, April 26th of this year. The Biden-Harris White House and EPA responded to the Western Revitalization inquiry on COVID-19 hazardous medical waste, the lack of congressional hearings, oversight, and regulations. The letter was sent to them last August, I believe. We heard back from them more question for question with encouragement to keep in touch. We plan to do that. Next slide, please. Here you can see, and my mom and dad can jump in also. Here you can see a list of articles and citations and quotes where you can get more information on the areas that we presented on today. Past articles going back to 2008, 2011, 2007. Work that my father and my mother have done, community partners, along with Dr. Wilson and Dr. Haney, and a lot of other folks who are allies and friends and family of the Western Revitalization Association.
Thanks a lot, Ayo. Great.
Thank you.
We would just like to mention that a lot of these articles and podcasts and conferences, some of the students, including Dr. Cecilia Wilson, were willing to actually co-present and co-author articles that their university professors refused to do. This is the disparity in intellectual property, disparity of respect. So the students understood the message, but some of the university professors did not want to co-author with somebody that didn't have a PhD or a medical degree, even though they wanted to study us like lab rats. So, but in any case, all of these major articles, and this is just a short list of them, were co-authored. Now, Dr. Cecilia Wilson was a student at the time, born and raised in Mississippi with the same kind of disparities. He is now associate professor and running his own program at the University of Maryland. He was on the panel, the same panel with us at the Citizen Science Conference in 2019 in Raleigh. That particular panel, an environmental justice panel, we had an overflowing crowd of over 800 people for that particular panel. Dr. Chris Haney is also associate professor at Johns Hopkins University. He was a student, and his master's degree was held up by some of his faculty members, his advisory team, because they refused to allow him to address the issue of lack of credibility with university research, that they should do more. And he had to go through a process that he was delayed a semester from graduating because he refused to back off the fact that universities were not doing what they should do. And he had to go through a whole lot of things, as university people know, to get that advisor removed and replaced so he could finish his master's degree and go on and finish his PhD at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and study overseas in several places outside the country. Now he's an associate professor at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. John Cooper, who is African-American, he is originally from Texas, living with grew up with some of the same kind of disparities. He is now assistant vice president at Texas A&M in his home state. And he still teaches students the models we learned. And some of the students have graduated. And one specifically, Dr. Marcus Hendrick, is now an associate professor at the University of Maryland. And there's a whole list of them. So we're working on a third generation of people who have learned. And he most recently was appointed to be the liaison between Texas A&M and Prairie View in Texas, that these universities who are getting all the money and the HBCUs who are getting very little should be doing collaborative work to correct the issue, and rather than all the money going to the major colleges and universities. And there's another one named Daria Hall Mendez, who is at the University of Pittsburgh. Another Dr. Danielle Purefoy, who has a law degree at from Harvard, and she has a PhD from Environmental Policy Sciences at Duke University. She now teaches at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the first full professor in the geography department, also dealing with the issues we're talking about here. And I can go on and on. There's a long list of students we've worked with who carry the issue of community engagement and community research far beyond the professors. And so many of them had to fight with their own professors to make the work real. And they still, some of the students coming along now are still having that challenge. Next slide. We're ready for comments and question and answers. Thanks a lot for inviting us.
Thank you.
And again, for our updated website, go to weranc.org. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you having us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yep, can you stop sharing and then we can see everybody? Thank you so much for that presentation. I mean, I was trying to take notes fast and furious. So I believe that hopefully the slideshow presentation will be available, because there's so many nuggets, right, in that presentation and the way in which you all covered it that that I'm sure people need to digest and want to read over. And I personally want to dive into the additional links you all provided for research and papers. So I believe that the slide presentation will be available for folks to review later. So I want to open it up for people who have questions. I know I have a couple of questions, but I want to reserve and leave this time for folks who have joined and been listening in. So if you can see the raise hand function, what I'll try to do is monitor who's raising their hand. So we have some, sort of order, but then you can come off of mute.
Yeah, I'm there.
You can have more of a discussion. And so the first hand that I see raised
Are you about to join us in?
is Marlene. Marlene, you need to come off mute.
I'm going to defer to our guest and let Penny go first, if you don't mind.
Okay, yep, go ahead, Penny, you were next.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saunders. I'm Penny Dryden. I am an environmental justice advocate here. And I certainly enjoyed your presentations, all of you. I think you're right on point. I'm familiar with your work. I'm familiar with Richard Moore, who's part of that National Advisory Council that you mentioned. You may know even Harold Mitchell. So I understand that work. I've been following and working with environmental justice groups all across the nation. So this is a warm welcome to hear from you. My question though is with the environmental justice, this Justice 40, I understand the work that you have done. How are you adapting that into what you are doing, or how does it apply in your mind as far as the Justice 40 initiative?
Okay, thanks a lot. Glad to meet you, Penny. Glad to make the connection. There are a couple of pieces here relative to the Justice 40 initiative. Our organization has been asked and invited to be among a small group, like 25 or so environmental justice and ground level organizations throughout the country to participate in various and a growing list of input. One is because Justice 40 is new and it has no infrastructure to facilitate itself from the White House to the ground level community. It has no staffing in place at the county level, the city level, the state level, or the regional government level. So one of the things we've been asked by the governor of North Carolina to be involved in reviewing the process of building an intergovernmental affairs stream dealing with environmental justice. We were invited to be a part of an environmental justice executive order. Well, it was called Clean Energy and Equitable Economy that referenced environmental justice 9 times, 11 times all total, included is reference to indigenous populations and how it should correct those issues, right? The executive order was signed on January the 17th on the campus of North Carolina A&T, one of the largest HBCUs in the country. And I taught there umpteen years ago, like 40 years ago. But in any case, what we're finding is in order to implement the executive order, the governor had to hire people and train people. And we've been asked to be a part of that training. We didn't expect that, right? Because what they're saying is there's a disparity of people who, quote unquote, they can get through the government process of degrees and certification and credentials to be hired at the state level of government. So they're still hiring and training people. There's a whole series of workshops we're going through. We've already been on a few of them. We also got to reach back from the United States Department of Justice because we filed so many complaints years ago. I myself did a listening and presentation or input panel session with, I think it was just 50 different groups from different parts of the country of how there should be an environmental justice office of the United States Department of Justice, which would be founded on a complaint we filed in 1999. And we got some positive reaction from the United States Department of Justice. But now they want to make a formal office of the Department of Environmental Justice. And it was officially certified, and there was a press conference on last week with the U.S. Attorney General and Cynthia Ferguson, who is going to be the attorney who's been with the Department of Justice for years. I knew her and met her from the time I was traveling around like 15 years ago with EPA, because she would come to some of the presentations, right? And there are some other people in the Department of Justice I know from way back. So they've asked us to continue to provide input because they're in the process of putting the staff together and officially hiring people. The same thing is true of the White House. The person who is a senior advisor for environmental justice out of the White House, the first one was Dr. Cecilia Martinez. I knew her from her community work as a professor that she did with Latino communities and Native American communities, but she left after a year, right, from burnout and lack of staff to support her. So she was a senior environmental justice advisor for the White House with virtually no staff. I mean, this is a big country, right?
Wow.
300 million people, right? How are you going to actually do your job? Because they are putting people into place in, what is it, building a plane while it's flying, so to speak. Most recently, after she resigned the same day we had the press conference in Greensboro at A&T with the governor of North Carolina, right? Last week, they appointed a new person, Jelon White Newsom from Detroit, Dr. Newsom. We knew her from our days of going to Atlanta in Region 4 EPA, and she worked for the Kresge Foundation. She's African-American, and she is now going to be the director for environmental justice for the Council of Environmental Quality out of the White House. I'm giving you a lot of names and acronyms. They call the CEQ, Council for Environmental Quality, the overarching umbrella that addresses environmental justice and environmentalism for all branches of the government. And there are
no staff,
17 to 18 of them all total, including the military. And, you know, but anyhow, she's a new person, and we also have worked with her, right? Attorney Brenda Mallory is the director for CEQ, which feeds information to all of the branches of the federal government. A lot of people put most of the weight on EPA, but EPA is only a part of the process.
I didn't open one with neighbors.
Sorry, Floyd, can you please mute yourself?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Well, EPA is one of the branches of the federal government, but it's supposed to be the lead branch, but it's one of the least funded, about $7 billion, when NIEHS gets 30-some billion dollars a year to study us, and we have a few billion dollars to solve the problem, which is backward, and that is never. Justice 40 is supposed to create some of that imbalance, but right now they're in the process of hiring people, putting people in place from the federal level down to the state levels. North Carolina is doing it because we have a blue governor, but we don't think it's taking place in some other blue-led states or red states, that they're not hiring people at the state level, right? This governor is doing it without approval of the state legislature. He's doing it based on what he can do, because our state legislature is a conservative red state legislature. It's led by that political party, right? So they're not approving this stuff from the state government level point of view. So he's doing what he can do on an executive orders basis. So we have a number of meetings we're having with EPA where they've called us in as consultants. We have a prep meeting tomorrow to deal with air quality. The EPA Air Quality Office that has 1,500 people working in it is located in North Carolina, just about 7 miles from where IO is in Durham. It's a research triangle park. So I've been asked to have input with the Water Quality Office with the EJ screening tool that I've mentioned, because I was one of the community people who helped design the EJ screening tool starting back in 2007. It was approved in 2010. And we're still in contact with Dr. Andrew Geller, who is the lead EPA official that invited us in. He continues to communicate with us, and he's been to Mebane directly. Of course, we know EPA Administrator Michael Regan is from North Carolina, and we invited him here when he was first appointed to the Secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality for the state of North Carolina. His first big meeting with community people was right here in Mebane with 15 other community groups, 150 some people over a 2-day period back in 2017. This is a continuum. What we want people at the local level to do is understand that this is a construction process, and you have to push your local governments to do some of the things we're doing here, and push your county to start adopting these EJ principles, your cities, to adopt them, and your state. We already have a footprint at the governor's office. The county's already accepted a major report that includes a section that we wrote that is presented to the state, and the city is already, as Ayo said, involved in environmental justice mapping. Even though it's not being done, this directive is not coming from the White House. We're doing it from ground up based on our research.
That's important.
That is
Sorry,
fantastic.
wrong answer, but it's
Thank you for that. Thank you for that response. I want to make sure we have about 10 minutes left, and I see hands going up everywhere. So I want to try to move us through. And Abby, you are up next. And so if we could keep the questions succinct, and then give opportunity for the Wilson family to respond, and then we'll try to get in. It looks like we have Marlene's hand up next, and then Noel Duckworth. I want to try to get all of the questions in within 10 minutes if we can. So
Sure.
Abby, you are up.
Hi, I'm Abby Nerlinger. I'm a hospital-based pediatrician, but I actually have a background in environmental health research, and I work with the American Academy of Pediatrics on a lot of pediatric environmental health initiatives. One challenge that I think is coming up in Delaware as we worked on some environmental health projects is actually I would say paucity of research expertise in the area of environmental health within Delaware. Of course, we have the public health department, but especially if you compare it to the resources available in Research Triangle Park between Duke, UNC, NIEHS, there isn't really an academic institution in the state that focuses on environmental health. And so, if you can imagine, I'm sure this challenges that you all have faced in North Carolina, I think some of those are even more difficult here because I hear about amazing research ideas all the time, but there just isn't the availability of researchers to partner with here. So just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, and if it really just goes back to, relying on the communities to push these agendas forward as much as you can. But it's just hard when that infrastructure is not there.
I'll quickly say that we had a formal relationship with Delaware. We were invited there, I think it was in 2016, I believe, 2017, by the Southeastern Regional Community Assistance Program, right?
Southbridge.
Pardon me?
It may have been Southbridge, maybe.
No,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
the
Go ahead.
Southeastern
Okay, sorry.
Rural Community Assistance Program, right? That's the name of it.
Okay,
And we met at Rehoboth Beach. We were there for 3 days, and they wanted us there to look at how to address the lack of safe drinking water in sewer facilities. They took us to site tours to areas where sewage was on the ground, in old trailer parks and new subdivisions. We know the topography of Delaware is not like North Carolina where we are, but there's not very much absorption in the soil. So we were there. A few years later, we were contacted. We were there invited by government agencies, state government agencies, I don't remember all the names now, and some university people. We met at churches, more than one, and they indicated that as a result of our work and our presentations there in Delaware, of the communities we took tours of, that some corrective action actually took place, right? Okay, in Delaware. Finding a friend or a university is willing to do it. University of North Carolina has been more quiet on the issue because the board of governors for the universities took away some of its operating initiatives relative to Black and brown communities. They closed a civil rights office in the law school. They closed it, defunded it, fired the staff, fired Black and brown people. However, we made a bigger partnership with Duke University. So now we're working with the Duke University's Environmental Law and Policy Clinic. And we have been for the last several years to actually keep the work going. It's a private school. It's a rich school, one of the biggest in the world. So they can do things that Carolina cannot do, right? So finding a partner that will keep the work moving. We've also working with the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, Elon University in our county, and North Carolina State University, and others. So and Shaw University. That's what's going on now. But we had to find the people who are willing to play some risky work based on their universities, and find support at the vice president level and the president's level to keep them safe in reaching out to these kind of communities. So we have that going on now.
Thank you for that. And I'll also just quickly add, Abby, that Dr. Brenda Wilson, that's at the University of Maryland, he's in Maryland, but very close to us, that the Wilsons mentioned several times in their presentation, has also been connected with Delaware and has offered several times that he is a willing partner to try to do some more collaboration with Delaware because they're so close. So there may be some opportunity for, some partnership, right, with university and other states. But he has definitely expressed that several times doing presentations here in Delaware. So with that, Marlene, you were next up, and then
and I'll be quick, and I just have a statement. To make. I think now that the ACCEL project has isolated over the years environmental justice as a big issue adversely impacting Delaware, that what the project needs to do is to go on the T4 end of the translational spectrum and advocate for a research to environmental justice related research to be undertaken by an institution in Delaware. Number two, Jacoby was the main presenter, or one of the main presenters at our toxic pollution workshop last year. And so, I mean, that is a readily available, partnership. And I think that one of the things ACCEL may need to do is think outside the box, to partner, with another university. My third part of my statement is I just wish that some of the people who were in the community engagement workshop where I moderated were in this workshop, because I have heard some of the concepts that we broached in that workshop that speak to how Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and IO do what they do, and around concepts such as funding equity and management parity and science for compliance. And I think one of the things that the ACCEL project can do is look at how we can do that with our funding sources. How can we penetrate NIH, for example, so that community folk like you can get funded? Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments, Dr. Saunders. Noelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cassandra, and everyone. This is to all of our the presenters today. I just want to thank you all for bringing up the institutional barriers at higher ed that you highlighted, because I work for the UD Partnership for Healthy Communities, and we're part of a broader community engagement initiative at the university. A lot of higher education institutions have gotten designated by the Carnegie Foundation as a community engaged institution, and are working to organize and coordinate to promote community engagement more in all aspects of their work: research, service, teaching, etc. And we have put some, we've put protocols in place at our partnership where, we don't publish without community partners as co-authors, and we have guiding principles. We have a definition of community engaged scholarship for health that really outlines, the things are not a one-way hierarchy, and it's mutually beneficial, where we learn as much from the communities as communities might gain from the research and resources that the university brings in. But there's a lot of work still to do, and there's a lot of barriers for even faculty that are dedicated to this type of work, where they can't move through promotion and tenure because often community engagement is not what counts. It is the publications and bringing in research dollars and things like that the presenters mentioned. So we have a lot more work to do in this area. And I'm wondering if there's any specific universities or institutions that you all have partnered with that have done a good job, more systemically, and not just relying on that one, like the gentleman, I think Mr. Wilson mentioned, who had to keep pushing and holding out. His, graduation got delayed and things like that. His program got delayed. So besides those warriors kind of internally that are really trying to change norms, has there been institutions that you have partnered with that seem to do a better job of this across the board?
We've come across one institution and some of their faculty members that came to our house demanding that they wanted us to give them our files. And we said no, and they still kept pressuring us. So we had pro bono lawyers who got in contact with them and told them cease and desist. Do not get in contact with us. Do not call us. Do not use any of our materials. We did have a gentleman, I think he and another gentleman, professors out in Oregon, who did a report. And my husband happened to be looking at on the computer, and he saw it, and it happened to mention a few things that we did, but they did not get in contact with us to let us know. I think that as far as communities are concerned, they need to partner with other universities, maybe partner with universities outside of the state. If they can't partner with the university that is there, and if the university is going to continue to use them as guinea pigs and do research papers, as you said, Noelle, that's more important than helping the community and finding a way for the community to get rid of the problem that they have. A lot of universities are afraid to do that because they get money from the federal government. And the state holds I don't want to say a gun to their head, letting them know you can't do this. This is not that important. It is important. It is important to help these communities to get rid of the problem that they have, not just to use them as guinea pigs or to give them a Walmart credit card after they get finished with them and let them go. And they don't have any response. The university doesn't come back and say, look, you could do this, you could do this, in order to get rid of this particular problem that you have. So if they have to go outside of the state to go and work with someone, then so be it. Or they can go work with another community and get their help to get their problem together. Or if they have to file a suit, Title VI, what we did, then they have to do that in order to get some results. Some results.
Now, I might have something to add too, because he has done presentations and co-presentations at various universities with us. So we'll let him, I'll add some information related to that too, that question.
My advice would be to with folks who are in the community who are recognize the problem and who want to bring their expertise to it. It means working with Black and Brown, the HBCU universities. I know back in the time when I was a graduate student at North Carolina Central University, my mother and father and some other folks, allies, presented there on some issues that they're talking about. And this is dealing with other organizations at our level and larger or smaller who are committed to these ideas and methods and ways that we think that organizations should be working together and how they should be engaging with communities. And that comes to be fleshed out in the work that we do. And this initiative is an example of that. So just using that, and I like personally, I like to along with my seat here at Wheeler, I sit on a number of boards, and I like to use that with organizations who do work in similar arenas, justice work, environmental and climate justice work in similar arenas, maybe not the same way, but I try to use my seats and influence in those areas to bring attention to what we're doing and to bring folks on board and to influence the way that they work and the way that they move. going forward, especially if they're a organization with more of a leadership of Caucasian persuasion, I should say.
Things I'd
Awesome.
like to mention real quick before.
Thank you thank you so much for that. Mr. Wilson, we'll give you 10 seconds to add something. We are at time, and so I want to close us out, but go ahead and finish your thought.
I'd just like to add that our four-year institution in Alamance County, the only one, Elon University, is invited to be a part of a 3-year program in association with Alamance County Department of Health and our organization to start addressing these major disparities. We have 2 big meetings, one on the 10th and one on the 11th, with a group of people and a multi-million-dollar funder who's putting $2 million to facilitate and implement some of the things we've been talking about for 30 years. So
that is amazing. That is fantastic. Well, folks, I thank everyone who's hung in there. We haven't lost anyone. We're at 3:02, and this brings us to the end of the ACCEL conference. And what a way to close it out. I, again, just want to give deep appreciation to the Wilson family, not just for your presentation today, but for all of the work that you are doing, because as you are fighting so hard in North Carolina, you are also fighting for all of us, right? And fighting for everyone across the country with the methods that you're using, the strategies that you're bringing forward, and the influence that you are trying to have on the country so that we can improve our Black and Brown communities, most importantly, who have been disproportionately impacted due to horrible policies such as redlining and residential segregation that has, pretty much put us in the situations that we're in today that you all are fighting against. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their participation today in robust discussion. We will ensure that the information that the Wilson family has shared in the slides is available to us all, right? So that we here in Delaware can collectively think about how we need to take some of these practices and principles that they are applying in North Carolina and see how we can move things forward here in Delaware. Thank you all, and have a blessed rest of your week.
Okay, thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.